On a winter night deep in the forests of America, the cold didn't just bite, it hunted. Snow covered the trees, the ground, and every sound, except one. A retired Navy SEAL, living alone in a wooden cabin, opened his door expecting only wind and silence. Instead, he found a trembling German shepherd mother, her black and tan fur stiff with ice, and behind her, two tiny puppies barely holding on to life. But she didn't rush inside for warmth. She looked at him and stepped back, as if asking him to follow her into the storm. What he discovered next would test everything he believed about loyalty, sacrifice, and why some families are worth risking everything for. If you believe dogs are more than pets, they're family, make sure to subscribe and stay with us for this unforgettable story. Winter had sealed the town of Pine Hollow, Montana, in silence long before midnight arrived. Nestled between endless stretches of forest and low, snow-choked mountains, Pine Hollow was the kind of place that looked peaceful on postcards and unforgiving in real life. Snow lay thick on the roofs, on the narrow roads, and on the ancient pine trees whose branches sagged under its weight like tired shoulders. The temperature had dropped far below freezing, and the air itself seemed brittle, as if it might shatter with the slightest sound. The storm wasn't raging yet, but it lingered with intent, a quiet predator gathering strength. In this part of Montana, winter didn't announce itself loudly. It waited, watched, and then closed its jaws. At the edge of town, where electricity flickered and cell signals died, stood a solitary wooden cabin half buried in snow, its windows glowing faintly with warm yellow light. Inside that cabin lived Daniel Walker. Daniel was in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, built with the dense, functional muscle of someone who had spent years carrying weight over long distances. His face was sharply angled, the kind shaped by bone rather than softness, with a squared jaw and a nose that had been broken once and never quite healed straight. A short, neatly kept beard traced his jawline, already dusted with flecks of gray that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with memory. His hair was dark brown, cut close, more out of habit than vanity. His eyes, steel blue and watchful, had the distant look of a man who rarely slept deeply. Daniel wore his Navy working uniform, the digital camouflage continuous across his jacket, chest, and pockets with no solid panels anywhere, not because he was on duty, but because it felt wrong to take it off. The uniform was worn, creased at the elbows, faded in places, yet meticulously clean. For Daniel, it wasn't clothing. It was armor. Years earlier, an operation gone wrong overseas had cost him 2 teammates and left him with a medal he never displayed and a silence he never filled. After leaving the Navy SEALs, he had chosen isolation over explanations, pine trees over people, snow over noise. Pine Hollow asked few questions, and Daniel offered fewer answers. That night, he sat at the small wooden table near the fireplace, a chipped mug of black coffee cooling beside him when the sound came. At first, it was so faint he thought it was the wind brushing snow against the cabin wall. Then it came again, scratch, scratch, weak, uneven, desperate. Daniel's spine straightened instantly. Training never really leaves you, it just goes quiet. He rose, moving without hesitation, boots heavy against the floorboards, and reached for the door. When he opened it, cold air surged inside like a living thing, stealing warmth in a single breath. The porch light illuminated the snow in stark clarity, every crystal bright and sharp. Standing at the edge of the light was a German shepherd mother, her black and tan coat matted with ice, ribs faintly visible beneath her fur. She was large but painfully thin, her legs trembling from exhaustion and cold. Her ears, usually proud and upright in the breed, drooped slightly, heavy with fatigue. Her amber-brown eyes locked onto Daniel's, wide and glistening, not with aggression but with something far more unsettling, pleading intelligence. She was not alone. Behind her, half hidden in the shadows of the porch steps, were 2 German shepherd puppies, no more than 8 weeks old. Their bodies were small and round in the way puppies should be, but the cold had stolen that softness. Their fur stood stiff, crusted with snow, and their tiny paws sank into the drifts as they shivered uncontrollably. One of them stumbled and let out a faint whimper, barely audible over the hush of falling snow. Daniel's chest tightened. He stepped forward, instinct already pulling him aside to clear a path into the warmth of the cabin. "Easy," he murmured, voice low and calm, the same tone he had used countless times in chaos far worse than this. "You're safe." He expected the mother dog to rush inside. Any animal on the edge of freezing would, but she didn't. Instead, she took a step back, then another, her body angled sideways, positioning herself between Daniel and the forest beyond, not blocking him, but inviting him to look. Her gaze flicked past him into the dark line of trees swallowed by snow, then returned to his face. There was urgency there now. Fear. Purpose. Daniel froze. He had seen that look before, not in dogs, but in men who knew time was running out. The puppies whimpered again, pressing against their mother's legs for what little warmth she could offer, yet she refused to move forward. Snow continued to fall, soft but relentless, collecting on her back, on the puppy's ears, on the steps of the cabin that promised survival only a few feet away. Daniel felt the old weight settle into his gut, the one that came before every decision that couldn't be undone. He glanced back into the cabin, at the fire crackling steadily, at the blankets folded on the chair, at safety. Then he looked at the dog again. She held his gaze without flinching, her breath coming out in shallow, uneven clouds. She took one more step backward, turning her head slightly toward the forest as if to say, "Not here. Not yet." The wind stirred the treetops, carrying with it a low, distant groan as branches shifted under snow. Somewhere out there, something waited. Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling the cold burn his lungs, and realized the choice in front of him was already splitting into two paths. Bring them inside now and save what was visible, or trust the instinct of a freezing animal asking him to follow her deeper into the storm. He stood there in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other clenched into a fist at his side, the light behind him and the darkness ahead, while the German shepherd mother watched him with a patience born of desperation. The night held its breath. Daniel stepped out of the doorway without changing a thing. The Navy working uniform stayed on him like a second skin, digital camouflage flowing uninterrupted across his jacket and pockets, already dusted with snow. He left the cabin door open behind him, a rectangle of warm yellow light spilling onto the porch and cutting a fragile line between shelter and whatever waited beyond. The porch lamp threw long shadows across the drifts, illuminating the two German shepherd puppies he carefully guided onto a folded blanket just inside the threshold. They were small, round-bellied despite the cold, their black and tan coats dull with frost, their eyes cloudy with exhaustion. One pressed its nose into the fabric and let out a tiny breath that trembled more than it should. Daniel crouched, moved by instinct rather than thought, and slid another blanket over them, tucking the edges close. "Stay," he murmured, not as a command, but as a promise. The mother watched him the entire time. She stood a few steps off the porch, snow collecting along her spine, muscles drawn tight beneath her coat. Her build was classic German shepherd, strong hindquarters, deep chest, powerful shoulders, but starvation and cold had sharpened her lines, pulling her skin tight over bone. She was not young, Daniel guessed, 4, maybe 5 years old enough to have learned caution the hard way. When he straightened, she turned immediately, stepping away from the cabin, then pausing to look back at him. Her ears flicked, catching every sound, her breath leaving her in shallow bursts. Daniel hesitated only once. He glanced back at the open door, at the fire that snapped and popped in steady rhythm, at the safety he could still choose. Then he shut the door halfway, not closing it, not committing fully to leaving. The wind sighed through the trees as if answering. He followed the dog into the forest. The snow beyond the porch was deeper, untouched except for the narrow trail of paw prints the mother carved with determined precision. Moonlight filtered through the tall pines, turning the world silver-white, sharp-edged and eerily bright. The forest was quiet in the way that only deep winter forests were. No insects, no birds, just the faint creak of trunks bending under snow and the soft crunch of Daniel's boots breaking the surface crust. The dog moved with purpose, despite her weakness. Every few yards she slowed, turned her head, and waited until Daniel was close enough to touch. Her eyes never left him for long, as if she feared he might disappear if she didn't keep him in sight. Daniel noted everything automatically: distance, terrain, wind direction, the way the snowbank dipped unnaturally in places, hinting at hollows beneath. His body remembered patrols through worse landscapes, nights when silence meant danger and hesitation meant death. Yet this was different. There were no radios, no coordinates, no teammates at his back. Only a freezing animal trusting him with something it could not carry alone. The trail narrowed as they moved deeper, trees crowding closer together, their branches interlocking overhead. The dog's pace faltered. She stumbled once, caught herself, and kept going. Daniel slowed to match her, careful not to rush her forward. He noticed the way her back legs trembled, the way she favored her left side just slightly. An old injury, maybe, or simply exhaustion stacked on exhaustion. He wondered how long she had been out here, how far she had traveled in search of help. He wondered what kind of desperation pushed a wild animal toward human light instead of away from it. She stopped suddenly. Daniel halted with her, heart rate steady but alert. She lifted her nose, sniffing the air, then let out a low sound, almost a whine, almost a breath that vibrated with urgency. Her tail dropped, stiff, and she stepped off the trail to the right. Daniel followed, ducking under a bent branch heavy with snow that spilled down his collar in a freezing cascade. The ground here was uneven. Snow lay smooth on top, but his boots sank deeper than before, the surface giving way with a hollow crunch that made his instincts flare. He remembered terrain like this from mountain operations, snow concealing drop-offs, buried obstacles, things that could swallow a man whole if he moved too fast. He slowed further, each step deliberate. The dog stopped again, this time planting her paws and refusing to go farther. She turned back toward him, eyes wide, shining in the moonlight, and then looked forward again, her head lowering toward the ground. Daniel followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Just a low rise in the snow, no different from the hundreds of drifts scattered through the forest. Then he noticed the shape. The mound was wrong, too smooth on one side, too sharply curved on the other. Snow had built up against it unevenly, as if something beneath had disrupted the wind. Daniel took a step closer. The mother dog let out a sharper sound now, a broken whine that cut through the silence like a blade. She circled the mound once, unsteady but insistent, then pressed her nose into the snow and pawed weakly at it, sending loose powder sliding away. Daniel's breath fogged heavily in front of him. He knelt, ignoring the cold seeping through his uniform, and brushed snow aside with his gloved hand. The surface beneath was solid, fur, dark, ice-stiffened fur that did not move. His chest tightened. He brushed more snow away, faster now, uncovering the curve of a shoulder, the line of a neck. The dog beside him paced in tight, frantic circles, her nails scraping faintly against buried ice, her breath hitching in uneven gasps. Daniel leaned closer, his face inches from the exposed fur, listening. At first there was nothing. Then, so faint he almost missed it, a sound, a low, strained groan, barely more than air forced past frozen lungs. Daniel froze. The sound came again, weaker this time. He placed his hand flat against the snow-covered body, feeling nothing through the layers of ice and fur, but knowing, with sudden, absolute certainty, that whatever lay buried here was still alive. The mother dog pressed against him, her side warm despite the cold, her head nudging his arm with desperate insistence. She looked at him, truly looked, not with fear now, but with raw, aching hope. Daniel swallowed hard. He had followed her without knowing why. Now he knew. And the weight of what came next settled into his bones as heavily as the snow above them. Daniel didn't think. He dropped to his knees and drove his bare hands into the snow. The cold bit instantly, sharp and punishing, but he welcomed it. Pain meant he was still moving. He clawed at the packed layers with a brutal rhythm learned long ago, fingers burning as they scraped ice and hardened crust away from the shape beneath. Snow filled his sleeves, soaked through the cuffs of his uniform, but he kept digging until dark fur emerged fully into the moonlight. The German shepherd lay on his side, half curled as if he had tried to protect himself from the wind. His coat was the classic black and tan of the breed, once thick and proud, now stiff with ice and matted with frozen snow. He was larger than the female, powerfully built, even in collapse. His chest was broad, his shoulders heavy with muscle earned not from comfort, but endurance. Frost clung to his whiskers, turning them white. One ear was folded awkwardly beneath his head, the other scarred near the tip. A thin notch that spoke of an old fight survived. Daniel brushed snow from the dog's neck, pressing 2 fingers gently against the fur, searching for warmth, for movement, for anything. At first there was nothing. Then he felt it, a faint, uneven flutter beneath the ice, so weak it could have been imagined. He leaned closer, ear near the dog's muzzle. A breath came out, then another, shallow, ragged. Each one seemed to cost the animal more than the last. The mother collapsed beside him with a sound that wasn't quite a whine and wasn't quite a cry. Her legs folded under her weight, and she pressed her body against the male's neck, licking his ear again and again with frantic tenderness. Her tongue trembled from cold and exhaustion. She nudged his head, then his shoulder, as if willing him to rise. The gesture was intimate, familiar, filled with history Daniel could sense but never know. He watched her closely now. Up close, her condition was worse than he had realized. Her flanks heaved, ribs stark beneath her coat. Her paws were cracked, raw at the pads. She was at the edge herself. Yet she ignored her own pain entirely, focusing on the dog beside her. Daniel understood then, with a clarity that hit like a blow to the chest. This wasn't just another stray. This dog had been standing here, holding this position, guarding the windward side of the drift while the storm howled and the temperature dropped. He had placed himself between the forest and his family, absorbing the cold so they didn't have to, not minutes, hours, maybe longer. Daniel had seen men do the same thing on frozen ground halfway across the world, standing watch long past the point of sense, long past safety, because someone else needed to sleep. He stripped off his gloves and dug faster, pulling snow away from the dog's torso, exposing more of his body to the brutal air. The cold slammed into the male's fur, but Daniel had no choice. He needed access. He needed to move him. He slid one arm carefully beneath the dog's chest. The weight surprised him. Even starved, even frozen, the shepherd was heavy, dense with muscle. Daniel shifted, bracing himself, and lifted slightly, just enough to free the dog's shoulder from the snow. The body sagged, limp and frighteningly unresponsive. The mother rose on shaking legs, pacing in a tight circle, her eyes darting between Daniel and her partner. She made a low, broken sound deep in her throat, something raw and pleading. Daniel met her gaze. "I know," he said quietly, voice rough. "I know." He wasn't sure if he was talking to her or to himself. He checked the dog's mouth, brushing ice away from his lips. The gums were pale, the tongue cold. Hypothermia this advanced was merciless. He remembered the training manuals, the lectures delivered in sterile rooms far from snow and blood. Rewarm slowly. Do not shock the system, but this wasn't a manual. This was a forest at night with a dying animal in his arms and 2 puppies waiting back at the cabin. He had seconds to decide. Daniel looked toward the trees, calculating distance by instinct. The cabin wasn't far, but carrying both dogs through deep snow would be slow, painfully slow. He looked back at the male. Another breath came, thinner, longer pause before the next. His heart thudded once beneath Daniel's hand, then stuttered, then settled into a fragile rhythm that felt like it could vanish at any moment. The mother pressed her forehead against Daniel's knee, grounding herself against him, trusting him with the only thing she had left. That trust cut deeper than fear ever could. Daniel exhaled, a cloud of white vapor ripping from his lungs. He had made harder choices in his life. This one felt heavier. He slid his arm fully beneath the male shepherd's chest and neck, supporting his head carefully so it didn't loll. The dog made a faint sound, barely audible, but it was enough. He was alive. Daniel shifted his stance, planting his boots, lifting with controlled force. His muscles protested immediately, cold, stiffened, and burning, but he ignored it. He had carried wounded men out of places far worse than this. He could carry one dog. As he rose, the mother moved instantly to his side, matching him step for step despite her weakness. She brushed against his leg, her body a constant point of contact, as if afraid he might drop the burden or disappear into the dark. Snow fell from the branches above as Daniel turned back toward the trail, each step sinking deep, each movement deliberate. The male shepherd's head lolled against Daniel's arm. His breaths came slower now, the pauses between them stretching longer. Daniel felt the urgency spike. He leaned closer to the dog's ear as he walked. "Stay with me," he muttered, words torn away by the cold air. "Don't you quit yet." The forest seemed to close in around them. Shadows stretched, warped by moonlight and movement. The trail back felt longer than it had on the way in. Daniel's shoulders screamed as the weight shifted, his grip tightening reflexively each time his foot slipped. He stumbled once, catching himself just in time, heart slamming against his ribs. The mother barked sharply, a single sound full of alarm, then pressed closer, steadying him with her presence. He could see the glow of the cabin light now, faint through the trees, a fragile star in the dark. Relief flickered through him, brief and dangerous. He wasn't there yet. He couldn't afford relief. The male shepherd's breathing hitched, one breath, long pause, another, weaker. Daniel adjusted his grip, angling the dog's chest closer to his own body, trying to shield him from the wind with what warmth he had left. The cold seeped deeper, numbing his forearms, his fingers. He welcomed the numbness if it meant he could keep moving. As he broke through the last line of trees, the cabin came fully into view, light spilling across the snow like a promise. The mother surged ahead, despite her exhaustion, barking softly toward the porch. Daniel staggered forward, boots heavy, lungs burning, heart pounding with a single ruthless truth. He could not save everyone unless he moved now. He reached the edge of the porch, knees trembling, and paused just long enough to look down at the dog in his arms. The shepherd's eyes were half open now, unfocused, glazed. His chest barely moved. Daniel swallowed hard. He stood at the threshold between forest and shelter, carrying one life while another clung to his side, knowing he had only moments left to decide whether to take them both inside or turn back into the cold for more warmth. The male shepherd's breath slowed again, each pause longer than the last. Time was running out. Daniel crossed the threshold of the cabin with the weight of the German shepherd heavy in his arms. Every step up the porch feeling longer than the miles he had once marched under fire. The yellow porch light poured out behind him, spilling across the snow like a living thing, a beacon cutting through the frozen forest. The mother dog staggered after him, her movements uneven, claws scraping weakly against the wooden boards as she hauled herself inside. The door swung inward on its hinges, and for a moment the cold fought to follow, clawing its way into the warmth before Daniel kicked it shut with his heel. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the labored sound of breathing that barely qualified as breathing at all. The cabin was small but solid, built from thick logs darkened by age and smoke. It smelled of pine resin, old wood, and faintly of coffee. The fire in the stone hearth burned steady, orange and alive, throwing light across the rough floorboards. Daniel lowered the male shepherd carefully onto the floor near the hearth, his movements slow and controlled, as if setting down something fragile and irreplaceable. The dog's body sagged immediately, limbs falling into unnatural angles, his weight dead and frightening. His black and tan fur glistened where ice still clung to it, crystals catching the firelight like glass. The mother dog collapsed beside him with a soft, exhausted sound, her head dropping onto his shoulder as if she had finally run out of strength to stay upright. Daniel stripped off his gloves and moved fast. He grabbed one of the military wool blankets folded over a chair, thick, olive-colored, scarred by use, and spread it across the floor. He slid another beneath the dog's chest, lifting just enough to insulate him from the cold wood. Then another blanket went over the shepherd's body, tucked in tight along the sides, leaving only his head exposed. Daniel reached up and twisted the dial on the old cast-iron stove, feeding it more air. The fire responded immediately, flames licking higher, heat beginning to radiate outward in slow, patient waves. The two puppies appeared at the edge of the room then, having followed the warmth instinctively. They were still trembling, their small bodies quivering uncontrollably, but their eyes were more alert now, drawn toward the shape on the floor. One was slightly larger than the other, with a darker mask across his face. The smaller had lighter tan markings and a thin white line on one paw. They crept forward on unsteady legs and pressed themselves against their father's side, noses burrowing into his fur. Daniel watched the mother closely. She lifted her head with effort and licked the male's muzzle once, twice, her tongue slow and deliberate. Her amber eyes were dull with fatigue, but they never left his face. Daniel knelt, placing his hand against the dog's ribcage, feeling for movement. The chest rose, fell, rose again, each breath shallow, uneven. He pressed his palm gently against the dog's flank, rubbing in slow circles to stimulate circulation, careful not to be rough. His fingers brushed against skin that felt frighteningly cold, even near the fire. "Come on," he murmured, his voice low, steady, the same tone he had used to keep men conscious on long evacuations. "Stay with me." The mother shifted, pushing herself upright enough to watch him work, her body shaking now that she was out of the wind. Daniel took a moment to check her as well, scanning for frostbite, for blood, for anything he might have missed in the forest. Her ears were cold but flexible, her paws cracked but intact. She was starving, exhausted, but alive. She leaned into his touch briefly, then turned her attention back to the male, pressing her shoulder against his. Daniel stood and moved to the shelf by the sink, grabbing a thermos of warm water and a small bottle of electrolyte mix he kept for winter hikes. He poured a little into a metal cup and set it near the fire, letting it warm further. He knew better than to force fluids into a hypothermic animal. Everything had to be gradual. Rushing could kill him faster than the cold already was. Minutes passed in a strange, stretched silence. The fire popped softly. Outside, the wind whispered against the walls. Daniel kept rubbing the dog's sides, his movements methodical, his mind locked into a narrow tunnel where nothing existed beyond the task in front of him. The puppies eventually stopped shaking so violently and curled closer to their parents, tiny bodies pressed tight for warmth. The mother dog lowered herself again, her head resting across the male's neck, her eyes half-lidded but watchful. Daniel checked the dog's breathing again. It had changed. The shaking, the violent full-body shivering that had racked him earlier, was slowing. Then it stopped altogether. Daniel froze. He pulled his hand back slightly, watching. No tremor, no involuntary muscle movement, just stillness. A sick, heavy stillness that made his stomach drop, severe hypothermia. He had seen this before, though never on four legs. When the body ran out of energy to shiver, it wasn't a sign of recovery. It was the body giving up the fight to generate heat. Daniel's pulse thudded in his ears. He leaned closer, ear near the dog's mouth, straining to hear breath over the crackle of the fire. One breath came, faint and delayed, then nothing for too long. He placed his fingers against the chest again. The heartbeat was there, but weak, irregular, like it might simply fade if no one noticed. The mother sensed the change instantly. She lifted her head and let out a low, broken whine, nudging the male's muzzle, then his shoulder. Her tail flicked weakly, agitation rippling through her despite her exhaustion. One of the puppies whimpered, sensing the tension, and pawed at his father's leg. Daniel swallowed hard and shifted closer to the fire, dragging the blankets with him just a few inches to increase warmth without shocking the system. He adjusted the layers, opening them slightly at the chest to allow heat to reach the core more effectively. He rubbed the dog's chest more firmly now, careful but urgent, watching for any response. "No," he muttered under his breath, jaw tightening. "Not now." The cabin felt suddenly too small, the walls pressing in as if they could sense the stakes. Daniel's mind raced through options. He had heat, he had time, maybe. He didn't have medical equipment. He didn't have a vehicle ready for this kind of emergency in these conditions. He glanced toward the door, then back to the dog. The mother's eyes met his, wide and glistening. She didn't growl, she didn't back away. She trusted him completely. That trust settled like weight on his shoulders. He couldn't fail her. Daniel took a deep breath and steadied his hands, forcing calm into his movements. Panic would help no one. He leaned closer to the dog's ear again. "You stood your post," he whispered, voice barely audible. "You did your job. Now it's my turn." The dog didn't move. The firelight danced across his fur, highlighting the rise and fall of his chest, or the near absence of it. Daniel stayed there, kneeling on the floor, one hand rubbing warmth into frozen muscle, the other resting lightly over a heart that refused to quit, but didn't know how to fight anymore. Outside, the forest held its breath. Inside, time narrowed to a single terrible question. Would warmth be enough, or was he already too late? Daniel forced his breathing to slow before his hands did anything else. Panic was useless. It always had been. In the teams, fear was acknowledged, compartmentalized, then put to work. He knelt beside the German shepherd, posture steady, shoulders squared despite the ache crawling through them, and treated the moment the same way he once treated wounded teammates in places no one back home ever learned the names of. Assess, stabilize, adapt. The dog lay still beneath the layered military blankets, his black and tan coat darkened where ice had melted into damp fur. His chest barely moved now. Daniel placed 2 fingers against the ribcage, counting silently, timing the breaths, too slow, too shallow. The heart beneath his palm fluttered like a bird trapped in a fist, irregular and fragile. Hypothermia, this severe, didn't announce itself loudly. It slipped in quietly, pretending the worst had already passed. Daniel knew the lie. He adjusted the blankets again, opening a small space at the chest to allow heat to reach the core without shocking the extremities. His hands began to work in slow, deliberate motions, rubbing warmth into frozen muscle groups, always moving inward, never forcing blood back into limbs too quickly. His fingers were numb now, skin stiff and aching, but he welcomed the pain. It anchored him. The mother dog remained so close he could feel her breath on his sleeve. She had pulled herself upright again, despite exhaustion that bent her spine and hollowed her flanks. Up close, her eyes told a story of endurance rather than age. Dark amber, sharp even through fatigue, the eyes of an animal that had learned survival through repetition and loss. She watched Daniel's hands with intense focus, head tilting slightly each time he changed rhythm or pressure, as if memorizing his movements. When he paused, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against the male's neck, a quiet, steadying presence. She did not interfere. She did not challenge him. She trusted him completely, and that trust felt heavier than any responsibility Daniel had carried in years. He leaned closer to the dog's muzzle again, listening, watching. A breath came, then another, weaker. Daniel shifted his weight, bracing one knee against the floor, and increased pressure slightly along the dog's chest, stimulating circulation with careful firmness. "Stay with me," he murmured, not loudly, not urgently. He had learned long ago that voices carried weight, and weight could crush fragile things. "You're not done." The fire crackled behind him, louder now as the stove worked harder. Heat pooled slowly around them, creeping across the floorboards, but the cold had sunk deep into the dog's core. Daniel knew this wasn't a problem warmth alone could solve. Not here. Not fast enough. Outside, the wind rose, howling through the trees with a violence that rattled the cabin walls. Snow struck the windows in sharp bursts, no longer drifting gently but driven sideways by the storm's full strength. The forest groaned, trunks flexing, branches snapping under the accumulating weight. Daniel glanced toward the door briefly, instinct gauging distance, time, risk. He was cut off now. Whatever decision he made, it would have to be made here. The puppies stirred as the noise outside intensified. One lifted his head and let out a thin whimper, pressing closer to his mother's side. The other crawled forward on unsteady legs and placed a small paw against his father's chest, as if checking that he was still there. The contact seemed to trigger something. The male shepherd's chest hitched. One breath came sharper than the last, then stalled. Daniel's jaw clenched. He repositioned the dog slightly, angling the body so gravity could help rather than hinder breathing. He checked the gums again. Pale. Still too pale. He reached for the thermos by the hearth, testing the metal with the back of his hand. Warm, but not hot. Good. He dipped his fingers into the water and rubbed a few drops along the dog's tongue, just enough to moisten, not enough to force swallowing. The dog did not react. Daniel set the cup aside and exhaled slowly through his nose. He was running out of controlled options. His mind flashed back to another winter, another night, kneeling in frozen mud with blood on his hands while rotor blades chopped the air overhead. He remembered the feeling then, the certainty that skill and will were sometimes not enough. That memory had followed him home, had shaped the quiet man he became. He pushed it away now. This was not that night. This was now. He leaned closer to the mother dog, meeting her gaze. "I don't have what he needs," he said quietly, as if she could understand the words if not the meaning. "Not here." She stared back, ears flicking, eyes searching his face. Fear passed through her expression, quick and sharp, then steadied into something else, resolve. She nudged the male's shoulder once more, then looked back at Daniel holding his gaze. The message was simple: do not stop. Daniel looked again at the dog beneath his hands. The shivering had not returned. The stillness remained. He knew what that meant. The body had burned through its reserves. The next phase would be collapse. He could slow it. He could delay it. But without intravenous warmth, without oxygen, without tools he did not possess, he was fighting with one hand tied behind his back. The storm outside roared louder, as if answering the thought. He rose slowly to his feet, keeping one hand on the dog's chest until the last possible second. He crossed the small cabin to the counter, scanning what little he had. Basic first aid kit, bandages, antiseptic, painkillers meant for humans. Nothing that could touch hypothermia this severe. His phone sat face down beside the sink. He picked it up, checked the screen. No signal, of course. The mountains and the storm saw to that. He set it down again with controlled calm, no wasted movement. He returned to the dog and knelt once more, rubbing warmth into muscle, refusing to stop just because the situation was turning against him. The mother dog shifted closer, pressing her side against his thigh. Her body shook now, delayed tremors catching up with her once the immediate danger receded. Daniel draped a corner of the blanket over her shoulders as well, sharing heat without separating her from the male. She accepted it without protest. Outside, a loud crack echoed through the forest, wood splitting under snow load. The storm was worsening fast. Daniel knew what that meant for roads, for travel, for time. He leaned back on his heels and closed his eyes for half a second, letting the truth settle fully into place. He didn't have enough medical equipment. He did not have backup. If he stayed, the dog might not make it through the night. He opened his eyes and looked down at the German shepherd's face. Frost still clung to the edges of his fur. His eyes were half-lidded, unfocused, the light behind them dimming. Daniel placed his palm flat over the dog's heart, feeling the weak, stubborn beat beneath. "All right," he said softly, the decision forming fully at last. "Then we move." The mother dog lifted her head instantly, ears pricking despite exhaustion. She watched him closely as he began preparing, dragging another blanket closer, scanning the cabin for anything that could help with transport, with warmth, with time. Outside, the wind screamed through the trees, furious and unrelenting. Inside, Daniel Walker moved with the calm precision of a man who had accepted the cost of action. He knew now what the night demanded of him. And he knew the truth he could no longer avoid. If he did not get this dog to real medical care soon, there would be no dawn for him to wake up to. Daniel moved with purpose, not haste. Haste made mistakes. He pulled on his heavy winter coat over the Navy working uniform, the fabric stiff with cold near the door where the wind leaked through the seams. The storm outside had grown teeth. Snow slammed against the windows in sharp, irregular bursts, and the trees groaned like strained joints under the weight. He crossed the cabin once more, checking the dog's chest, adjusting the blankets, then turned toward the door with a single, ruthless plan forming in his mind. Get to town, find help, come back before the night took what little strength remained. He reached for the handle and stopped. The mother dog stood there, directly between him and the door. She had dragged herself up on trembling legs, her body angled sideways, not blocking him with aggression, but with presence. Up close, the lines of her face were stark, sharpened by hunger and cold. Yet her eyes were clear, reflective, and steady. Her ears were lowered, not in fear, but in humility. She did not growl. She did not bare her teeth. She simply stood, looking up at him with a stillness that cut deeper than any bark could have. Daniel froze. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The storm howled outside, rattling the latch, trying to force its way in. The fire snapped behind them. He had faced men who begged, men who threatened, men who pleaded with words and weapons. This was different. The dog's gaze was not asking him to stop. It was thanking him. It was acknowledging the choice he was about to make and accepting whatever came after. The realization struck him so hard, it stole his breath. She believed this was the end. Daniel swallowed, throat tight. "I'm coming back," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure if he was convincing her or himself. She held his gaze for another second, then stepped aside just enough for him to pass. As he reached for the door again, a faint sound came from behind him. A soft scrape. Daniel spun. The male shepherd's head had shifted slightly beneath the blankets. One ear twitched, his chest rose, barely, then fell. It was nothing. A reflex, a whisper of movement, but it was unmistakable. Life. The mother saw it too. She let out a breath that shuddered through her entire body and pressed her nose gently to the male's cheek, as if sealing the moment, as if reminding him to stay. Daniel felt the ground shift beneath his certainty. He crossed back to the dog in 2 strides and knelt, placing his palm flat against the chest again. The heartbeat was still weak, still irregular, but it was there. The breathing was shallow but present. The body had not given up yet. He closed his eyes for a brief, controlled moment. The decision fractured into 2 paths with equal weight and opposite consequences. Leave now, fight the storm, gamble on reaching town and returning in time. Or stay, use what he had, and battle the clock inside these walls while the blizzard raged unchecked outside. He had been trained to choose the option that preserved the mission. Tonight, the mission was a life. He rose slowly, pacing once across the cabin, hands clenched at his sides. His mind ran calculations without numbers: distance, visibility, response time, margin for error. He pictured the road out of Pine Hollow, buried under fresh drifts, trees downed by wind, the truck struggling for traction. He pictured getting stuck, delayed, helpless, while time bled away inside this cabin. He stopped beside the fire and stared into it, watching the flames coil and snap, remembering another night years ago when he had chosen speed over patience and paid for it with a man's life. That memory had never let him sleep easily again. He turned back to the dogs. The mother had lowered herself beside the male once more, her body curved protectively around him, sharing what warmth she could spare. The puppies slept now, curled tight against their parents, unaware of how close they had come to loss. Daniel knelt again, this time with resolve settling into his bones. He would not leave, not yet. He adjusted the blankets carefully, then added another layer from the chair, creating a pocket of warmth around the dog's core. He dragged the low wooden table closer to the hearth to act as a partial windbreak, redirecting heat inward. He fed the fire again, controlling the draft so the temperature rose steadily, not sharply. He checked the male's breathing again, timing it, counting silently. It was still dangerously slow, but it had not worsened. He looked up at the mother dog. "We stay," he said simply. Her ears lifted slightly. She watched his face, then let out a soft, almost inaudible sound that might have been relief. Outside, the storm intensified, as if angered by his defiance. Snow hammered the walls, and a deep crack echoed somewhere in the forest as a branch surrendered to gravity. Daniel ignored it. He settled himself on the floor beside the dog, back against the hearthstone, positioning his body to shield the male from drafts while keeping his hands free. He began a steady rhythm of movement: rub, pause, listen, adjust, letting time stretch into something manageable. Minutes passed, then more. The fire burned low and hot. The cabin smelled of wet fur, wood smoke, and determination. The male shepherd's breathing shifted again. One breath came a fraction deeper than before. The pause between breaths shortened, just slightly. Daniel leaned closer, eyes sharp, refusing to read too much into it but unwilling to ignore it either. "That's it," he murmured. "Stay." The mother lifted her head, watching, her body tense with cautious hope. The storm outside did not ease. If anything, it grew louder, the wind screaming through the trees like a warning siren. Daniel knew dawn was still hours away. He also knew that the worst decisions were rarely the loud ones. They were the quiet ones made in moments like this, when every instinct argued for action and every lesson argued for restraint. He stayed where he was, hands working, mind steady, refusing to abandon the fragile line the dog still clung to. The night pressed in around the cabin, relentless and merciless, while inside, a man and a family of dogs held the line together, waiting to see which would break first, time or the cold. The night stretched in ways Daniel had not felt in years, elastic and unyielding, each minute pulling itself thin before finally snapping into the next. Outside the cabin, the blizzard continued its assault, but inside, time slowed to the rhythm of breath and fire. Daniel stayed exactly where he was, seated on the floor beside the hearth, back against the rough stone, legs bent, boots planted firmly as if the ground itself might give way if he relaxed. The German shepherd lay inches from him, wrapped in layers of blankets, his large frame unnaturally still. The firelight painted the dog's black and tan coat in deep amber and shadow, revealing the powerful lines of a body built for endurance and work. Even in collapse, the dog looked formidable. Broad skull, thick neck, scarred ear, the kind of animal shaped by purpose rather than comfort. Daniel's hand rested lightly over the dog's chest, never pressing, never leaving, fingers tuned to the faintest change beneath the fur. Every shallow rise was counted, every pause was measured. The mother dog had settled beside him as the hours passed. She lay with her flank against Daniel's shin, her head resting on the toe of his boot, breath warm against the leather. Up close, in the quiet, her features softened. Her coat, once harsh with ice, had begun to dry and fluff slightly near the fire, revealing the deep sable tones beneath the black. Her muzzle was dusted faintly with gray, not old but weathered. Her eyes, half closed now, still opened instantly whenever Daniel shifted or the male's breathing changed. She trusted him enough to rest, but not enough to sleep deeply. The puppies had finally surrendered to exhaustion. Curled together between their parents, Their small bodies rose and fell in quick, even breaths, paws twitching occasionally as if dreaming. Daniel watched them with a strange ache in his chest. He had guarded men while they slept before, counted breaths in the dark, listened for the moment when silence meant danger. He had never guarded something this small, this fragile. The fire burned low and steady, and Daniel fed it sparingly, careful not to spike the heat too quickly. He kept the cabin warm but not hot, controlling drafts with the precision of someone who understood airflow instinctively. Every so often, he leaned forward to rub warmth into the dog's chest and shoulders, slow and consistent, never stopping long enough for the cold to reclaim ground. His arms ached, muscles trembling with fatigue he refused to acknowledge. He had learned long ago that pain was negotiable. The storm outside howled, then ebbed, then surged again, the forest answering with creaks and groans as trees bent under the weight of snow. At some point in the deep night, the wind shifted, striking the cabin from a different angle. Snow slid from the roof in a heavy rush. Daniel flinched only slightly, senses sharp despite exhaustion. He checked the dog again. The breathing was still there, not stronger, not weaker, suspended, as if balanced on a knife's edge. He leaned his head back against the stone and closed his eyes for a moment, not sleeping, just resting them. Memories tried to surface in the quiet, faces, voices, moments frozen in other winters, other nights, but he pushed them aside. Those memories had taught him how to sit through hours like this without breaking. He opened his eyes again and looked down at the German shepherd. "You're stubborn," he murmured softly, the corner of his mouth tightening into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I respect that." The mother dog lifted her head slightly at the sound of his voice, eyes meeting his in the firelight. There was no fear there now, only vigilance, and something that looked dangerously close to hope. She lowered her head again, trusting the space between breaths. Time crept forward. The firelight dimmed, then brightened as Daniel adjusted it. Shadows stretched and shifted along the log walls. The puppies stirred once, then resettled, one letting out a tiny sigh that sounded impossibly content given the night they had survived. Daniel checked the male's gums again. Still pale, but not worsening. He counted breaths again. 1, 2, 3. He forced himself not to count heartbeats this time. He knew better. Dawn announced itself subtly. Not with light at first, but with change. The wind outside lost some of its sharpness, its howl breaking into uneven gusts rather than a single sustained roar. The temperature inside the cabin felt different too, less combative. Daniel noticed the shift without looking at the windows. His body had learned to read nights like this long before words ever explained them. When the first gray light finally filtered through the frost-rimmed glass, it was thin and uncertain, painting the snow outside in muted silver. Daniel straightened slowly, muscles protesting as stiffness set in. He leaned forward, checking the German shepherd with renewed focus, searching for signs he might have missed. The dog's eyes were closed. His breathing was steady, still shallow, still fragile, but present. No shivering had returned, no movement beyond the bare minimum needed to stay alive. The mother dog rose onto her elbows, following Daniel's gaze, ears lifting just slightly. She sniffed her mate's muzzle, then looked back at Daniel, waiting. Daniel exhaled slowly. Dawn had come. The night had not taken him, but neither had it given him back. The German shepherd did not wake. He did not lift his head or open his eyes. He remained suspended in that terrible middle place between survival and surrender. Daniel sat back on his heels, hands resting on his thighs, the weight of the moment settling fully into his chest. He had chosen to stay. He had held the line through the worst hours. Now the question remained unanswered. Outside, the forest stood silent beneath fresh snow, the storm spent for the moment. Inside, the cabin was warm, quiet, and tense, as if every object understood what was at stake. Daniel looked at the dog one more time, then at the mother, then at the sleeping puppies. He knew what the next hours would demand of him. He also knew he could not force an ending. Some battles were decided not by action, but by patience. He stayed where he was as the light grew stronger, refusing to look away from the life still resting beneath his hand. Morning arrived without ceremony, sliding into the cabin on a pale ribbon of winter light. It filtered through the frost-laced window panes and spilled across the wooden floor, revealing a forest still buried in snow, but finally calm. The storm had spent itself in the night. Pines stood motionless under white crowns, and the air outside looked clean and bright, as if the world had been washed and left to dry. Inside the cabin, warmth held steady. The fire had burned low, and even through the darkest hours, and Daniel Walker remained exactly where he had been when dawn began, kneeling near the hearth, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the German shepherd lying beneath the blankets. His face looked older in the daylight. The hard lines along his jaw were more pronounced, the faint gray in his beard catching the light. His eyes, steel blue and steady, carried the weight of a night measured in breaths rather than minutes. He had not slept. He had not moved far. He had simply stayed. The male shepherd lay quiet, his powerful body relaxed in a way that no longer felt ominous. His chest rose and fell with a rhythm that, while still shallow, was unmistakably steady. The black and tan fur along his neck had dried completely now, revealing the dense undercoat beneath. The scar on his ear was visible in the morning light, a thin white line cutting through dark fur, a mark of an old survival. Daniel leaned closer, listening. Breath in, breath out. He waited for the pause that had haunted him all night. It didn't come. A small sound broke the stillness. The shepherd's eyelids fluttered, once, then again. It was so subtle Daniel almost doubted it, until the lids lifted a fraction and dark brown eyes, clouded but present, met the light for the first time. The dog did not move his head. He did not attempt to rise. He simply looked, confused and exhausted, as if waking from a dream too heavy to shake off. Daniel's chest tightened. He didn't speak. He didn't reach out. He waited, understanding instinctively that this moment belonged to the animal, not to him. The mother dog reacted instantly. She surged to her feet with a sharp intake of breath, her body still thin and worn, but fueled now by something stronger than fatigue. She stepped closer, placing her nose gently against the male's cheek, releasing a soft, broken sound that hovered between a whine and a sigh. Her eyes shone, wet and bright in the morning light. She licked his muzzle once, then again, careful and reverent, as if afraid he might disappear if she was too rough. The puppies woke at the sound. One lifted his head, blinking, then scrambled clumsily toward his father. The other followed, paws slipping on the blanket before finding purchase. They pressed their small noses against the shepherd's chest and face, tails giving faint, uncertain wags. The male's eyes shifted toward them. His breathing deepened by a fraction. It was enough. Daniel moved then. He lowered himself fully to his knees and reached to his chest, fingers brushing the fabric of his Navy working uniform. He found the old patch there, frayed at the edges. Colors dulled with time, a piece he had carried longer than he admitted to anyone. It had belonged to a team that no longer existed, to nights that still visited him when sleep came too easily. He peeled it free carefully, the Velcro giving a soft, final sound as it released. He set the patch on the floor beside the dog's near the shepherd's outstretched paw, not as an offering, not as a promise, but as a marker of something laid down. He exhaled slowly, feeling the quiet settle. The mother dog looked up at him then. Their eyes met. In hers, there was no fear left, no question, only recognition. She stepped closer and placed one paw against his knee, a simple, grounding touch. Daniel rested his hand briefly against her shoulder, feeling the warmth there, solid and alive. Outside, sunlight strengthened, turning the snow into a field of light. Inside, the cabin felt different, not safer, but fuller. The door, still ajar from the night before, let in a slice of cold air and brightness. Daniel rose and pushed it open wider, letting the morning in. He did not close it again. The German shepherd blinked once more, then closed his eyes, not in surrender, but in rest. The mother settled beside him, her body curved protectively, her breathing finally even. The puppies tucked themselves between their parents, satisfied. Daniel stood back, hands at his sides, the uniform he had worn through war and winter, now carrying the quiet weight of a different kind of duty. No words were needed. The cabin door remained open, not for the storm, not for the past, but for the life that had chosen to stay. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the form of a door left open, a heart that refuses to walk away, and lives that choose to trust when there is every reason not to. That night in the frozen forest, no one saw an angel. But warmth replaced the cold. Life replaced silence. And a family survived when they shouldn't have. Maybe that is how God works most often, not by stopping the storm, but by placing the right soul in its path. In our daily lives, we all face moments like this, moments when it would be easier to turn away, easier to say, "I've done enough." Yet sometimes choosing compassion becomes the miracle itself. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your words matter more than you know. And if you believe in kindness, second chances, and quiet miracles, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. May God bless you. May He protect you and your loved ones. And may He guide you to be someone else's miracle when the moment comes.